Today, we are very pleased this morning to kick off our conference. We have a very distinguished guest. Our keynote speaker this morning is from our neighboring country of Indonesia. Kyai Haji Yahya Cholil Staquf is the current General Secretary of the Nahdlatul Ulama Supreme Council. The Nahdlatul Ulama is the world's largest Muslim organization with an estimated membership of over 40 million. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Kyai Haji Yahya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa syukurillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah Sayyidina Maulana Muhammadin ibn Abdullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi mawala. Amma ba'd, distinguished speakers, participants, I want to firstly express my thankfulness to our host, the Istanbul Network, Mr. Ali Salman, for giving me the honor of this stage. Yesterday, we all repeatedly heard one particular question. Is Islam compatible to democracy, or is democracy compatible to Islam? Well, we are then facing a question about definition. What is democracy and what is Islam? In practical level, our question would be, what is the mindset of the mass of Muslims? The mindset that the mass of Muslims have about democracy. And what is the mindset that the mass of Muslims have about Islam? We may all agree that democracy is about freedom, rights, dignity, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence amid diversity. But then, do the mass of Muslims have the same perception with us? Do they really think that democracy is really about dignity, equality, tolerance, and so forth? And then, what is Islam? Yesterday I had some smokes outside together with one of our friends, Dr. Kamil Bayram, and we had this conversation about the Malaysian Council of Fatwa issued a fatwa forbid Muslims from smoking, and that it already become a law here. So what do we do? And then, interestingly, Dr. Kamil said, well, then I'm not a Muslim because he wants to smoke. Now, so what is Islam? In the mind of the mass of Muslims, what is, the reference that the mass of Muslims use to define Islam? Thinking about this, we need to understand that there are some references that are considered to be the most authoritative references for Muslim to find the right Islam. Because when a Muslim seriously wants to be a good one, then he needs to find a reference to guide him to become a better Muslim. Now, the most authoritative sources or references for guidance that Muslim would look into is first, of course, the Quran and the Hadith, and actually also the authoritative discourse of Islamic thoughts that's already developed, has been developed for centuries. And the most authoritative sources among those discourse is the one from the classical discourse of Islamic thought. We're talking about, schools of thought like the Shafi'i, the Maliki, the Hanbali, Hanafi, and so forth. We're talking about the school of thought like Ash'ari and others. Now, so when we are thinking about whether Islam is compatible to democracy or not, then we have to see, to observe the mindset of Muslims about Islam. So the question would be, is the mindset of Muslims about Islam compatible to democracy? Now, when we look into the references in classical discourse of Islam, we will find several problematic elements there. I can point out among many problematic elements, 4 centers of concerns related to not just democracy, but to the nature of our current civilization. The first is the teaching about relationship between Muslim and non-Muslims. In the classical discourse of Islamic teaching, the dominant view about this matter is that Muslim and non-Muslim are enemies. The basic norm of the relationship between Muslim and non-Muslim are enmity. That is what's dominant in the classical discourse of Islamic teaching. We have, for example, in the tafsir Quran by At-Tabari or At-Tabrani or Ibn Kathir, it was stated that non-Muslim, meaning infidel, infidel is permissible to kill merely because of his infidelity. That is there in the discourse. We also, for example, have in the very famous book in Shafi'i tradition, the I'anatul Talibin, for example, it is stated there that Muslims has the obligation, the collective obligation to do expansive jihad toward non-Muslim at least once a year. It is there in the discourse. So we still have these problematic elements in the reference that is still considered to be very authoritative among mass of Muslims all over the world. So the first problematic element is the teaching about the relationship between Muslim and non-Muslims. And the second problematic element is the teaching about religion, conflict of religion itself. What kind of conflict, the category of conflict that is eligible to be considered as conflict of religion. For example, when the Buddhists in Myanmar attack Muslim there, it is already a legitimate reason for Muslims everywhere in the world to declare war against the Buddhists. I believe you all aware that this kind of arguments has been also the argument that the terrorist groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda has been using to to attract Muslims to join them, because the infidels from America attacked Muslims in Iraq, in Middle East, then it is a legitimate reason for Muslims to attack any Western infidels all over the world. That's their argument. And it is justified in the classical discourse of Islamic teachings. The third problematic elements would be the existence of nation state. You see, nation state is now the base of our current world order. The world order that we have now based on the existence of nation states. But this is something new. And there is no normative base about the nation state in the classical discourse of Islamic teaching. What is dominant there in the discourse of Islamic teaching is the obligation for Muslim to struggle for one grand imamate, al-imamah al-uzma, meaning one universal political system under one Muslim ruler. That is what there and the classical discourse of Islamic teaching. So then the fourth problematic thing would be the status of state laws, as the alternate of the Sharia. What would Sharia sees? The state laws. State laws as produced by modern political processes, by democracy. It is an obligation for Muslims to follow the state laws, or should they reject the state laws and follow the Sharia instead? Is following state laws such as the traffic regulation, an obligation for Muslim, a Sharia obligation for Muslim, or it's just it's just worldly affairs, not related to religion. So all these are centers of our concern regarding Islamic teachings, because it is still recorded in the most authoritative references of Islamic teaching. Now, if we want the Muslim world to go toward democracy, then we need them to accept, ultimately accept some relevant views, such as Muslims should view others, non-Muslims, the infidels, as equal members, citizens of this global society. And Muslims should treat them without enmity, without discrimination or segregation. If Muslims are not willing to have this view, then democracy is not for them, because democracy demands equality among fellow citizens. If we want Muslim world to accept democracy, then we should demand Muslim communities to accept view that people must not use religion as justification for political conflict anywhere in the world. Because if they do so, then any conflict in any part of the world would be seen logically as a universal conflict of religion. We have to demand for Muslims to accept the view, to accept the existence of nation state as a political system binding all the citizens, Muslim and non-Muslim equally, and not pursuing what's so-called the caliphate, the Imamah Uzma. Because once they do that, they will end up doing like what ISIS and Al-Qaeda do, pursuing caliphate, and then triggering conflicts all over the world. We have to demand Muslims to accept state laws as the result of legitimate modern political processes to bind their life all together with their fellow citizens, Muslim, non-Muslims, and not using Sharia as justification to defy the state, to defy the laws, or to raise for rebellion against the legitimate government. Now, while we have the reality that many, maybe most Muslims still see this authoritative references, this classical discourse of Islamic teachings to be the most authoritative reference for religious guidance, then we will always face the challenge of Muslim being radicalized in the name of authoritative Islamic teachings. Now, earlier this year, on last May, our organization, Nahdlatul Ulama, we held a gathering of ulamas from from all over the world. We have at least ulamas from 20 countries, 20 different countries, gathered more than 300 of them. And then as a result of that gathering, the conference, we declared what we call as Declaration on Humanitarian Islam. The view is that we have to think about how Islam can contribute more positively to our current human civilization. What we've been witnessing, at least for this last maybe 30 to 40 years, is that this world is facing problems, continuously from the direction of Islam, until the problems of terrorism that we have, and still no sign of decreasing. Now, so to make the effort, so that Islam can be a positive contribution to our current civilization, then we have, before that, we have to deal with our internal problem first, the problem of Islam first. This reference is problematic elements of views, in Islamic teachings. They're still there and considered to be authoritative by many Muslims, must be resolved. So what we call for the Muslim world is to recontextualize Islamic teachings. Because now we are facing a very different reality that what it was there when those discourse of Islamic teachings were created. The classical discourse of Islamic teaching emerged in the era when Muslim world was relatively integrated into one consolidated political and territorial political system and territory, with Ottoman Empire ruled the most of the era. So in that time, conflict between Islam and other religion would be conflict between different states, such as Ottoman against European states. And the war was, the fight was the fight among soldiers. Nowadays, we have the reality where Muslims live together with non-Muslims everywhere in the world in the same neighborhood. So if we allow conflict of religion, what will happen would be a social catastrophe that, most certainly would lead to genocide. Genocide of Muslim living in as a minority in the majority of non-Muslims, and genocide of non-Muslim living in the Muslim majority society. So this is very conflict of religion for the context of our reality, our current reality, is just not acceptable. Now, The thing is that we need the significantly powerful alternative of views on Islamic teaching, altering the old authoritative, the old established view of Islamic teaching, at least regarding these 4 centers of concern that I mentioned. Of course, we have many, many others to discuss about the elements of Islamic teaching, but these 4 centers of concerns are the most critical things that we have to deal with. So we need to be honest to deal with this problem. The way I see it, what ISIS did was that they want to force the reality of today's living to be, following what is there in the source of Islamic teaching. Everything they did, they have the justification from the authoritative references of Islamic teaching. They have justification from Quran, from Hadith, and from the classical discourse of Islamic teachings. That should tell us that we need to recontextualize those elements of Islamic teaching so that Islam would be really compatible, harmoniously function in our current civilization, not just to democracy, but to the entire civilization that we are living today. Without recontextualization, then, having democracy as a formal procedures for political processes in Muslim countries would even produce more problems, because there we will find political actors who want to use these problematic elements of Islamic teaching as a weapon for their political purposes, to gain support, to gain legitimacy. And it will be very dangerous to the whole society. But when Muslims are called to this kind of cause, then Muslims will be willing to sacrifice anything, because they see it as a divine call, a divine obligation. And we are seeing all this all over the Muslim countries, from social unrest to civil wars. Now, that means also that when we talk about transition to democracy in Muslim worlds, we should also consider Muslims living in non-Muslim worlds, because we are living in a less bordered reality now. This is a borderless world we are living now. Whatever happens in Muslim worlds will affect the life in non-Muslim worlds. Whatever Muslims do in their in the society where they are the majority will affect the life of Muslims living as minority in other part of the world. So, thinking about this, I would say that we need to be aware and acknowledge that we are facing a civilizational problems here. And it is not just for Muslim to do something about it, because it concerns the whole world. It concerns the whole human civilization. We have 1.6 billion of Muslims among around 7 billion citizens of the same planet. So whatever, what direction this thing will go, then will determine the fate of the planet, the entire planet. Is it possible to do such recontextualization like we propose? We believe that it is possible. Why? Because we did it in Indonesia. We actually did it in Indonesia. In Indonesia, our Muslim leaders produced an alternative discourse about the state, alternative discourse about the relationship among a group of different religions. Yeah. We practically produce alternative discourse about all those, related to all those 4 centers of concern. And moreover, we managed to make this alternative views of Islam to be dominant among our Muslim society in Indonesia. It doesn't mean that then we have no more problem. We still have the challenge. And the challenge keeps coming over and over. And we have to deal with it frequently. But up until now, we manage to survive, meaning to keep this alternative views of religious teaching dominant among our Muslim society. Now, because you see, this is not just about creating a new alternative discourse as an intellectual effort. Because the problem that we have is also related to authority. We have many, many different ideas in the market, but which ideas would be adopted by the mass of Muslims? That is a matter of authority. Which ideas, are considered to be authoritative or more authoritative than others? And authority, so this is also a problem of authority. And authority is a function of politics. So this is not just about to win the debate between the new ideas versus, the old ideas, but it's also about political struggle. So the way we manage to keep our alternative views dominant, we do it through a political struggle. So now what we need is to consolidate globally to face this challenge together. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Kyai Haji Yahya. We will now have a Q&A moderated by Ali Salman.
Thank you so much, Pak Yahya, for a very thoughtful presentation on the challenges faced by the Muslims across the world, and also relating with your experience in Indonesia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's some room for question and answers. So I invite you to please come over to the microphone and share your thoughts and questions, please.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated your speech. I'm glad you expressed the influence of the nation-state mindset, which created a kind of a dependence mentality over the citizens to accept everything from the state. And very good to hear about the alternative discourses on Islam within the civil society, within the civil leaders. I would like to ask you or to expand your opinion about the importance of free will within Islam, free will. When I understand the needs of Muslims to ask for a kind of an authority to find a way for Islamic practices, however, I think we need a plural organizations or plural different authorities that people would follow different organizations and different paths, tariqs, with their free analysis and free will. But if we expect one of them, just like a state, to be the real and the superior authority to decide in place of the individual, then we would not talk about free will within Islam and not keep an individual responsible with his acts. Then we might not talk about sin or crime as well. So I would like to hear your opinion about one, free will, and secondly, in connection with that, not seeing the state as kind of the shadow of God or the state as a divine institution. So thank you.
Thank you, Aslam. Wan Saiful.
Hi, my name is Wan Saiful Wanjan. I'm from the Istanbul Network for Liberty. I'm from Malaysia. Your last sentence is a very interesting one. You know, people should unite and champion the cause at the global level. I'm just wondering how you think we can do that, because the tendency is when the Muslims start fighting non-Muslim, fighting quote unquote, they start fighting each other. You know, so how do you reconcile the differences in the different schools, different ways of thinking, and you know, even nationalism within different countries? How do you think we can get together and ignore the differences?
Yes. Okay.
Hello, I'm Ira. I was very interested in what you said about the needing to contextualize Islamic teachings, but more often than not, in the counter argument to that from the other side would be, you know, the message of the Quran is eternal, the Quran is applicable to any time and place, and it's perfect and it cannot be changed. So I'm wondering what your response would be to that. How would we reconcile this contextualizing Islamic teachings but the eternal message of the Quran?
Okay, please.
Hi, I'm Alma from AIF. I think by the end of your speech, and first of all, I appreciate very much you have squarely tackled some of the most pressing issues, and basically you have not shied away to really bring up these problematic issues that I think some of us are still confused about it. By the end of your speech, you said something which I think is very much agreeable, that what kind of discourses will be adopted by the masses of the Muslim populations, it depends very much on the authority. So my question is, dealing with this kind of problematic discourses in classic Islam text, is it more of a problem for authority and for the imams and for the muftis and for all these kind of structures of powers everywhere in the Muslim world, rather than a problem for the masses? because basically the masses are being led by people who go to Saudi Arabia, study something, and come back. I can tell you, let's say from my experience in my own hometown, people usually are very open to their fellow citizens. It doesn't matter the religion. And of course, the experience from former Yugoslavia or inter-ethnic relationships were very good until the politics and the radical religious agendas started to, trickle down and infect everybody. Like you can see now, you can see now Ratko Mladic punishment in Hague court. People are pretty happy with that kind of verdict, but it is the religious, Orthodox religious Serbians who are actually talking about it. So I think there is a problem of structure, the problem of authority everywhere, and perhaps less of a problem for the masses. So perhaps you can comment on that. Thank you.
We take one more question in this round, and then we go to Pak Yahya. Please.
Thank you. Kyai, I just like to state that I concur with your idea that we should be contextual in our perception or view of Islam, and shouldn't be reminiscing on the situation of the past. My question is, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State of the US, has stated, and I quote, "We open a joint office in Riyadh to purify religious books of extremism by producing new books to be taught in Saudi Arabia, distributed worldwide, and all textbooks currently being studied and distributed will be recollected. Young imams of mosques will be prepared under the direct control of White House officials." Can you comment on this? Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I will try to put a set of response on all of those questions. First, the key of all this matter is honesty. We have to be honest in acknowledging the problems, because this is really problems that need to be solved. If we do not acknowledge the problem, how can we solve the problem? Now, first, is it possible to contextualize Islam? Because it is said that Quran is eternal, is unchallengeable, and so forth. You see, even each verse of Quran was revealed related to a particular context of reality when it revealed. So in understanding Quran, each verse of Quran, people cannot detach that verse from the context of reality when it was revealed. That means that contextualization is inevitable. Islam is meant to be a grace for humanity, not a problem. So if Islam then drives people to have a problematic life because of the conflict between the teaching with the reality, then it is just unacceptable. Now, when we acknowledge the problems, then we can later on, moreover, identify the problematic actors. Because the nature of orthodoxy is that it has a structure from authoritative sources of reference to the whole body of a religious life that is effective among Muslim society. That includes the imams in the mosque, includes the madrasas, the ulamas, and so forth. Now, this, the problem, in dealing with the structure of orthodoxy is that most of the structure of Islamic orthodoxy nowadays are still not aware about these severe problems, or even not willing to acknowledge. We've been seeing many denials, everywhere about these problems. So, if we want to talk about a global consolidation to deal with it, we need to demand for the whole international community to be aware and acknowledge these problems, and to together put a demand to the entire Muslim world to respond to these problems, and let all those elements of the structure of Islamic orthodoxy to engage this problem and find solution, and encourage them to do so. Last year, January 2016, there was an international conference of Muslim scholars in Marrakesh, Morocco. The topic was about the right of religious minority in Muslim majority countries. That was the topic. So the questions that were supposed to be asked in that conference was such as, are non-Muslims has the right to worship freely, following their religion? Are non-Muslim has the right to build places for worship? No. Do people have the right to convert? Do Muslims have the right to convert without punishment? These are supposed to be the question. But there were no answers whatsoever. The only thing that the conference declared is that they call for Muslim scholars to review, to observe and review these problems and try to find solution following the tradition of fake heritage, the tradition of the heritage of Islamic jurisprudence. This, give us a picture about how authoritative the classical discourse of teaching is. So even more than 400 international Muslim scholars, did not dare to challenge that authority to produce alternative discourse, because it's still there, dominant in the classical discourse of Islam teaching that apostates should be killed, that non-Muslims should not be allowed to freely worship, and so forth and so forth. There is a book entitled Kifayatul Akhyar, written by an ulama from 14th century named Taqiyuddin bin Muhammad al-Husaini. In that book, it is stated that discrimination on non-Muslims is obligatory. Non-Muslims should wear, something, some sign that, show that they are not Muslim, some belt or something, Non-Muslim should not be allowed to ride, vehicle. Non-Muslims should not be allowed to walk in the same road that Muslims use. It is there in that book. And that book is still considered to be one of the authoritative source of Islamic jurisprudence. So this is all the problem. Now, being aware that the challenge, the problem that we are facing is so huge, then we need to consolidate a sufficient, powerful authority to deal with it. That's why we need a global consolidation. The way I see it, we need to pose this problem to the world so that the whole world will be aware about it and together demand Muslim world to respond properly. That's what we need. I had this conversation with an American friend when I was in Washington, and there is actually it is a repeatedly coming question from non-Muslims to Muslims, This friend said, well, this is an Islamic problem, so you Muslim have to deal with it. And I said, no, this problem concerns you. This problem concerns your security, your future also. So you have all the right to engage with this problem and determine the result. Because this is the problem of our current human civilization. We have to deal with it together. Because if not, then we have to think about an alternative civilization. Or maybe we have to think about the coming doom. So, again, this is not just about the ideals of individual independence, individual freedoms, and so forth. This is, the way I see it, is civilizational problems.
Other questions you want to address, like the free will thing and issues here?
Yes, of course, it's related to free will and free, the right of free thinking also. Because if you don't deal with this problem, you see, when people embrace a religion, it is natural that they want to be a better adherence of that religion. If you're a Muslim, it's naturally you want to be a better Muslim. So when you seek the guidance to be a better one, you need to find, again, authoritative sources for that. Now, if we don't deal with these problematic elements, then free will, free thinking will not compatible to Islam, will not be compatible to Islam. If we allow Islam to be defined mostly by these problematic elements of teachings. Now,
Secretary of State, that comment, last comment.
Yeah, and now what happened with the United States forcing the Saudis to reform their religion, their religious educational system is something good. I would say it's a good thing to do. But you see, and also recently we heard the Crown Prince of Saudi stated that he wants to bring back Saudi to moderation. But now the problem is not just about the Saudi. What we need is not just for Saudi to reform themselves to be moderate. We need Saudi to get involved in the effort to solve these problems and a global consolidation. Yeah. That's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Yahya. I guess that you have answered most of the questions in your responses. I don't see any other pressing questions here, and if you allow me, I would like to conclude the opening session with a bundle of thanks to you for coming and presenting your experience and thoughts on a very important topic, and also I think opening up debate further for the day ahead. You talked about the strategy, you talked about a response, and you also explained your own position. Thank you so much for this. Over to you, Ayla.
Thank you.